Good afternoon. My name is Joseph Louis Boohaker. I come from Birmingham, Alabama. My home is in Zahli, Lebanon. Well, my name there is Joseph Elias Boohaker, but they have a hard time with that in Alabama, so we just call it Joseph Louis Boohaker. When I'm a lawyer, but I became a judge, and my first job as a lawyer was as a clerk in North Alabama, a place called Lauderdale County, where they didn't have too many people that looked like me. They had one guy who was an Iranian, they called him Colonel Mike, and when I first went to the clerk's office up there, I asked for the list of files that my judge had asked for. And I went to the clerk's office and I talked to Miss Wanda Perkins, and I said, Miss Perkins, I need this list of files. And she looked this way, and then she looked this way, and I said, well, what are you looking for? She said, I'm looking to find who asked for those files. And I said, well, I asked for the files. She said, nobody that looks like you talks like that. So for Sir Rabia, who's here with his Georgia accent, tell him I want to apologize for my Zahlewi accent, and I hope he can understand my Southern accent. Now, we have a lot of folks who are going to talk to you today, and the topic that we are charged with is why Christianity is vital to the Middle East. We have heard so far in our conference, this 3-day conference, it is played out almost like a jury trial that I preside over regularly. I have one to start next week. And what we have heard are the advocates of the sides that are asking for action to be taken. The patriarchs here would make wonderful lawyers. I would love to see them practice in my court. They have advocated, they have made the case. When you put a jury in a box in a jury trial, there are 12 disinterested people that you as an advocate are desperately trying to rule in your favor. That is not much different than what this organization is trying to do with the conference that it has called together today. And I think I would be remiss if I didn't take just 1 minute to thank the people who did this. First, my good friend Tufik Batlini. The people who helped him, Joe Sella, Mark Corallo, and Andrew Doran. They have done yeoman's work to pull this thing together in just a few short months. And I think we need to all give them just an applaud, a hand. But they have answered this question so far that a jury of 12 disinterested people would ask. When the question is, what is your problem? That question has been asked, and it has been answered. And now we come to the next part. When a case is tried, first you put the evidence on. That tells the jury what is the problem. Now, once the evidence is in, it is the job of the advocates to argue their case. In arguing the case, they're telling that jury of 12 disinterested people why they should rule in the favor of the advocate. That will be the job of this panel that is meeting here, that I will introduce to you here shortly. Why should we help you out? There's no one in this room who needs to have an answer to the question, why? You all know the answer to why. If we could solve this problem with the people in this room, we wouldn't have to answer the question, why? But we are advocating to 12 disinterested jurors. When we went to Capitol Hill yesterday, we saw representatives of the 12 disinterested jurors, people who are not from the Middle East, who do not share our culture, who do not share our identity, who do not identify with the heritage and the culture. And I'll tell you that I'm third generation. My grandfather came to America in 1912. As a lawyer, I've helped countless numbers of people come to America, and I've helped them get their American citizenship. And just this week, I picked up my papers from the Lebanese embassy to become a Lebanese citizen. So it goes both ways, I guess. But as we make the case of why and how we get people who are disinterested to move and to come and help us out, there are two ways you can do that. One is to appeal to their emotion, and that's easy. To our own people, we can make them feel guilty for not helping the folks back home. To other people, we can appeal to their fear. You're going to make them angry. And anybody who's in politics will know that the easiest way to move people is to make them afraid or to make them angry. But in order to do that, you have to rob them of their intellect. You have to make them ignorant first before you make them angry or before you make them afraid. That's one way that we can move the people to act. The other way is to appeal to logic and to reason, as a lawyer would in a courtroom, where your case is based not on fear or anger, but is based on the facts. We don't have to run away from the facts in this case. The facts are strong, and they're with us, and we can make that appeal. And if we do, and we keep it factual, I think that we can win the case. Now, I'm not the advocate today, I'm only the judge, and I'm the timekeeper too, I want you to know. Everybody knows they only have 8 minutes to speak, and I'll be keeping time on it. So I want to introduce my panel, if they'd all come out now. And I'll introduce them, I'll give you their names in order. First we have Dr. Philip Salem, if he would come on out. Dr. Salem. And Dr. Salem will be our first presenter. He will be followed by Father Nabil Haddad, by Mr. Edward Clancy, by Mr. Nabil Costa, Bishop Julian Dobbs, Michael Lasavita, Neemat Frem, and Bishop Mar Awa Royel. Our first presenter will be Dr. Philip Salem. Dr. Salem is the director of the Cancer Research Program, St. Luke's Episcopal Hospital in Houston, Texas. Dr. Salem.
One single paper. Somebody must have thought that ISIS is a cancer and that a cancer doctor is needed to address this issue. First, let me thank the organizing committee for inviting me to participate in this beautiful and successful conference. And I think the conference has addressed the major and basic issues, and I would like to focus only on a few issues that I feel that they are of great significance. The first issue is that the title of the conference is in defense of the Christians. And indeed, the Christians are in a crisis. But the crisis is not limited to the Christians. It involves the whole Middle East and some other parts of the world. It is the issue of the oppressed, the issue of the human who does not have the freedom to think and the freedom to choose his religion. In fact, this conference is in defense of the dignity of man, all men, whether they are Muslims or Christians. It's in defense of the oppressed, of the weak, of the defenseless. This is the message of Christianity. It is the message of love and love for all. The second issue, today is September 13 years of a war against terror. Where are we now? We are now worse than 13 years ago. Whatever strategy the West and the world has embarked on did not work. We need new ideas, innovative strategies to fight this war. One thing is clear, is that military power alone is not enough. This terror has deep roots. It is rooted in the mind. Occupation of the mind is far more serious than occupation of land. Land can be liberated by military power, but the mind cannot be liberated by force. We need a different strategy where liberation of the mind would be an important component of that strategy. We need to liberate the minds of these people by education. I understand that this is a long-term part of the strategy, but it is an important part of it. Unless we liberate the mind, we will never win this war. The education system is at the root of the problem. We have to face the roots of the terror. We have to radically change the education system that supports that occupation of the mind. We also need to bring on board moderate Islam. This terror is far more damaging to Islam and to Muslims than to Christians. Islam, moderate Islam, should rise to the challenge. All we hear now is a deafening silence. There are soft voices that we hear, but this is not enough. We need to hear moderate Islam in a loud voice and in a solid commitment in the war against this terror. We cannot win this war without moderate Islam. The third point, the political and the terror landscape now in the Middle East has put us in a corner. They are trying to tell us, you have a choice, either the dictator or radical Islam. We refuse both. There is a third option, the secular state. I've spent the last 30 years publishing about the importance of separation of religion from politics. The most dangerous mixture is the mixture of religion and politics. And I'm so glad to see that the major platform of this conference is separation of religion from state. But I want to add one big secret. You cannot win in establishing a secular state if you don't also separate education from state and from religion. The biggest problem in the terror mind is that religion is part of education, the core education. That doesn't mean that we don't have religious schools, but it means that education should be free of any stricture that religion would try to impose. It is important that we espouse an education which is dynamic, which is liberal, which is based on science, based on the human mind. But again, I emphasize, we are witnessing now, in this era of technology, how technology is crushing the mind, the heart. I do not want to live to a day where the mind crushes the heart. Without the heart, the world is a dark place. The heart grows with religious beliefs, but a religion that teaches love does not teach hate. Thank you very much, and I'm glad for
Thank you, Dr. Salem. Our next speaker is Father Nabil Haddad. Father Haddad is the founder and the CEO of the Jordanian Interfaith Coexistence and Research Center. Father Haddad.
Thank you, sir. Assalamu لجميعكم. Peace to all. I bring you blessings from the birthplace of Christianity. I bring these blessings from the land where the one God, the Holy Trinity, was proclaimed 2,000 years ago. From the Bethany of Jordan, and I am a Jordanian, an Arab Christian, a Ghassanid. I bring with me the history of my ancestors, the Ghassanids, the princes of Arabia, the princes of the Levant, and those who made the miracle of Petra. In Jordan, where I come from, we talk about Christianity as a history and as a way of life. The first community, the first Christian community that continued existing since the day of Pentecost, where our great-grandfathers, forefathers were present. With that, I come to talk to you, brothers and sisters, while we are discussing the defense of Christians. So it is an honor and privilege to me to be standing here with you today in a very special occasion amongst a gathering of all my fellow Christians. About a year ago, September 2013, in Amman, and in a very historic event, Christians gathered under the theme, the challenges facing Arab Christians, an event initiated by an invitation of His Majesty King Abdullah II, a Muslim Arab leader. Leaders from churches and Christian communities throughout the world gathered to discuss the problems and challenges that affect the lives of all Christians in the region. This summit, here and today, comes at a crucial time as we witness the rise of extremism in the Middle East, which cannot be left to gain momentum. I cannot think of a better time together and collectively think about ways to strengthen the voices of moderation and coexistence in an effort to protect and to defend the Christians' presence in the region. I come to you from Jordan, where we have a long heritage that existed since the apostolic times, in harmony with our country's Arab heritage and identity. And we, as Christians, we treasure this heritage. It is very imperative under these circumstances to avoid acting in isolation, as it is plainly suicidal. Christians should not work in isolation or accept to be isolated, because we are an integral part of the land, of the history, of the present, and of the future. Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, the Muslim voices of moderation should be our partner and our ally. It is therefore very important that we take and we find a good partner and ally in these moderate circles with whom we can and should share a common ground. Christians of the Middle East are an integral part, and that integral part should take the lead in building our region, in confronting extremism. In defense of Christians, we need the people of goodwill to confront the extremist ideology, and we should not forget to reward those who can promote moderation. In answering the question why Christianity is vital to the Middle East, I tell you it is vital, because we believe we are vital. It's so important that we have that conviction, and we should have the determination. That's why we are against the immigration with an E. If we look at the region now, we will see that your brothers and sisters, the Christians, are victims. I come to you here from Amman, and in my church, we have 32 Mosul Christian families whom we hosted and whom we facilitated their flee to Jordan. We did this because they are not refugees, they are not guests, but we consider them as brothers and sisters. They are part of the family. And I tell you that they were welcomed in Jordan by our Muslims and Christians together. In His Holiness Pope Francis' remarks during his pilgrimage to Jordan on the 24th of May this year, and I was standing this far from His Holiness when he gave the speech, he commended Jordan model of coexistence. He said, and I quote, "Although Christians today are numerically a minority, theirs is a significant and valued presence in the fields of education and healthcare. Thanks to their schools and hospitals, they are able to profess their faith peaceably in a climate of respect for religious freedom. Your brothers and sisters, that small community of Christians in Jordan, this big, 2% of the population, they make a difference in Jordan because they believe that they are vital in Jordan and in the Middle East. Today, I would like to call on my fellow participant brothers and sisters, the Christians, to issue a statement that calls for Muslim leaders of goodwill to work hand in hand with us to put an end to the current ordeal in the Christian population. And we need to build a new era where all must be a part of an alliance. Jordan has been a leading country in two things. One, that we are very proud of being members as a country of the 4-star club of the pontifical visits. We had four popes who came to Jordan, visited Jordan, and blessed Jordan. And the message of moderation was strengthened by and through that pilgrimage of the 4 popes. The other thing, we are very proud that in Jordan and from Jordan, 3 international important interfaith moderation and coexistence and harmony initiatives were launched. One is the Amman message. In 2004, 512 Muslim scholars from around the world, they gathered together and they spoke of a moderate interpretation of Islam. Allow me to share with you that I was the first to take that document and I delivered it to Ambassador Reverend John Danforth, a member, the permanent representative of the United States of America and the Security Council at the UN in New York. And I told him this document would be a good prescription for fighting, confronting extremism. We need moderation. And this is a Muslim voice that called for moderation. At the end of the day, this document helps building harmony and coexistence. In addition to 2 other initiatives by His Majesty, a common word, the first document, theologically based document between Muslims and Christians that talked about the 2 commandments, love of God and love of neighbor. This document was adopted by all Christian churches in this world. And the third initiative was the World Interfaith Harmony Week, which was adopted unanimously by the United Nations, that calls for houses of worship, for pulpits and mosques, churches and synagogues, to preach harmony, to preach love, respect, and justice. What we need to do is, as we want to work to defend Christians, I think we need the moderate partner. This makes us very important element and vital to the Middle East and to the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Father Haddad. Our next speaker is Mr. Edward Clancy from Aid to the Church in Need. Mr. Clancy, you'll have 3 minutes.
Thank you. I guess in answering a question, you should have to look at the words in the question. And when you ask the question, why are Christians vital to the Middle East, you look at the words vital and Christian. Christian comes from followers of Christ, and Christ means goodness. So even in the title of the conference and the summit, in defense of Christianity, the word Christianity could be in defense of goodness. I work for an organization called Aid to the Church in Need. We were founded by a priest who answered the call of the Holy Father to help Germans who were forced to emigrate back to Germany. And they were told that there was no place for them, and they were crammed into buildings called Hochbunkers. And thousands of people were crammed into buildings that were made for a couple of hundred. And they were forced to live there. A family got one bed. On the bed was the mother and the father and the youngest children on top and the older children underneath. That was their existence. The father would go out into the streets during the day and try to find something to bring back to his family for the evening. The mother looked after the children. Father Wernfried, our founder, went to visit one of these places. And because of that, his heart was moved. He wrote a letter called No Room at the Inn, where he equated the problems of these German Catholics and Christians with Our Lady and St. Joseph, and there was no room for them. Today, because of our work around the world, we're a papal foundation. At our 60th anniversary, Pope Benedict said to us, do two things. Help to improve the presence of Catholicism and Christianity in the media, and defend Christians in the Middle East. Now, 6 years later, 8 years later, we're at a conference speaking about it. A couple of weeks ago, a woman called the office and she said she would gladly give money to fund planes to fly all of the people in Syria and Iraq and anywhere else they're suffering, and to fly them out of those countries and bring them to places where they could worship in peace, where they wouldn't have to worry about being Christians anymore. It sounds like a good idea on one level. But we have to look at the question, what do Christians do where they are? For 19 centuries, Christians in the Middle East have suffered persecution of one sort or another, and yet they persevered. Today, in places where they are vast minorities, they still have great effect. For example, the University of Mosul has about 30,000 students, or had about 30,000 students. The Christian population of Mosul was under 10%, and yet almost half the students at that university were Christian. Why is that? Education is important. In Syria, many major cities, 40% of the doctors and nurses are Christians. They care for all. They don't ask what your faith is. When someone comes in, they help them. In the Archdiocese of Khartoum in Sudan, for example, there is a parochial school system, a K through 12 system. A great majority of the students are Muslim. And the church funds this completely, gets no help from the government. In places like India, where there are rules against Christianity being spread, in places like Nagaland and Meghalaya, we see the church making its presence. We see that most teachers in primary schools are Christian. In places like Bahrain, Qatar, and Kuwait, the government seeks the Christian churches for help dealing with social issues. When an Albanian nun from an Irish congregation answered God's call in a train in India to serve the poorest of the poor, India was changed. the world was changed. When a plane or a truck arrives with a Christian symbol on it, people know that help has arrived. And that's why you look at the word Christian, and what does it mean to you? It means love. It means service. It means mission. It means witness. It means help. It means all these things to the people everywhere, in every part of the globe. We have the great fortune to work with some incredible people. One of them is a priest, Father Elian Nasrallah. He's in Lebanon. He's on a border town of Syria. When all of the war and everything started to happen in 2011, refugees started crossing the border looking for safe haven. One winter night, Father Nasrallah was at his church doing what he had done for days and days, 16 or 18 hours a day, taking care of refugees, finding them shelter. This one very cold night, very late, a woman approaches him and says, "Father, I need shelter for myself and my 10 children." He said to her, all of the places are gone. We're more than filled to capacity. I cannot do anything for you tonight. But if you come to me in the morning, I will make sure that I find a place for you. So the next morning, Father Elian saw the woman, and he went to her. And he said, "I'm here to help you now. It's for you and your 10 children. And she said, "It's me and my 9 children. He says, "9? I thought you said 10. Yes, it was 10. My 12-year-old son died last night of exposure. Now, Father Elian had to deal with that heartache. The mother did too. But Father Elian continued to work after that because he knows the little that he does, even when it's imperfect, even when he cannot help everyone, makes a difference. It's very simple. Without a Christian presence, there will be less charity. There will be less education. There will be less stability. There will be less democracy. Christianity's presence means more literacy, more compassion for the poor. It means greater chance of survival and improvement for those who are born even in absolute poverty. The stakes are enormous. Christianity might entirely disappear from the very region of its birth. Such a disaster would not only mean the loss of ancient patrimony, it would also mean the demise of a key player in societies dominated by Islam, and unfortunately now dominated by radical Islam that seeks to kill and destroy rather than to live side by side. The Christian faith promotes tolerance, and in many countries the church provides crucial social services as well as access to quality education for all, regardless of belief. For the West and all people of goodwill, Christians are indispensable. I ask you, if defending Christianity was a crime, how many people could be sent to jail for it? How many people would put their life on the line for it? There are thousands of our brothers and sisters right now, right this very moment, who are being persecuted for their faith. We have to help them. When we met with Archbishop Warda of Iraq, he asked for 4 things. Pray for us. Help us with your aid. Build awareness, but most of all, don't forget us. Actually 2 months ago, we met with Archbishop Kaigama of Nigeria. In May, everybody had hashtag Bring Back Our Girls. Remember that? Everybody was talking about it. The girls who were taken into slavery. What happened? It was forgotten. Christians are vital in the Middle East. I know this room will not forget them, but do not let others forget them. Thank you.
Thank you, Edward, for all the work that you do. Our next speaker is Nabil Costa. Mr. Costa is from the Supreme Council for Evangelicals in Syria and Lebanon. Mr. Costa.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I am a Middle Eastern evangelical Christian. I was born there, and have lived and worked in the region all my life. I address you today on behalf of the Supreme Council of the Evangelical Community in Syria and Lebanon, which I also officially represent at this summit. The Christian communities of the Middle East, and especially the evangelicals among them, are dwindling fast. In recent years, but especially in the last few months, Christians in Syria and Iraq have witnessed horrific atrocities committed against their families and communities because of their faith. In both countries and elsewhere too, Christians have fled homes in which they have lived peacefully with Muslim neighbors for centuries. They were forced out by extremists with intolerant ideologies who revel in barbaric, violent conquests. Persecution and the attraction of an easier life elsewhere have led many Christians to immigrate to the West, leaving the Middle East for good. The number of Christians in Iraq has almost halved since 2003. Thousands of Christians have left Egypt and Syria in the last 3 years due to violence and conflict. One can understand their reasons for leaving, but it's not good for the Middle East that Christians are immigrating in such numbers, as there is a risk that Christianity will be eradicated from the region altogether. Christians shouldn't have to leave. This is their land as much as it is their neighbors from other faiths. Christianity has been a vital part of the history and culture of the Middle East since the 1st century. Some of the oldest buildings in the regions are churches and monasteries whose dwellers have made important contributions to civilization, especially to literature and the arts. The worldwide church was born in the Middle East and must continue to exist and witness its birthplace. Several Muslim leaders and scholars have often repeated the thesis that Christians were in the region before Muslims. They are not strangers, not foreigners. They are the natives of these lands and Arabs, just as Muslims are. Many Middle Eastern political and government leaders acknowledge the significant contribution of Christianity and the development of the Middle East and have publicly declared it. The protection of Christians is a duty rather than a favor. Christians have always played a key role in building our societies and defending our nations. Middle Eastern Christians are loyal citizens of their respective countries. They do not constitute a subversive element in their societies, but rather as salt and light. They contribute to the overall good of the countries in which they live. This has been their ethos ever since it constitutes the basis of their social ethics. The hospitals, the social institutions, and the economic programs that Christians have initiated and run in the Middle East have transformed communities and countries across the region. Christians in the Middle East have been pioneers in education. Some of the top schools, universities in the region were established by Christians. In Lebanon, evangelicals, alongside with Catholics and Orthodox, have played a key role in this regard. The American University of Beirut, Lebanese American University, Haigazian University, and Middle East University, along with tens of other academic and vocational schools, are all widely known to have been founded by Protestant missionaries in the 19th and 20th centuries. These institutions have attracted both Muslims and Christian students and have nurtured a culture of peace and reconciliation, as well as mutual respect and tolerance between the two faiths, something that is sorely needed in the region. In Lebanon, Jordan, and Egypt, there are 60,000 students from different faith backgrounds in evangelical schools and colleges. At least 70% of those students are Muslims. Parents often attribute their children's strong morals to their education of these institutions. Also in Lebanon alone, Catholics have more than 250,000 students enrolled in their schools. In all Lebanon, we have 1 million students. 650 are in private schools, and more than half, 55 or 60% of those students are enrolled in public schools, and 60% of them are Muslims. Christians do not expect their students to convert to Christianity. However, certain values become embedded in all of them. Thus, rarely do the graduates of these Christian institutions get involved in any violent action. It is the theology of reconciliation and forgiveness core to Christianity that the schools follow and that is making tremendous difference and impact. If Christianity left the region, this approach to education would probably disappear and the Middle East would suffer and become even worse than it's already now. Another recent example of the Christian contribution to the current crisis in the Middle East is the way in which, during the Syrian crisis, so many local churches have become places of compassion for people of all faiths. It's well known that there has been a massive influx over 1 million Syrian refugees into Lebanon alone, which means that Syrians now from almost a quarter of the Lebanese population. Churches are quickly responding to the needs of these refugees, most of whom are Muslims. One such church, for example, with a congregation of 70 members, is serving 700 vulnerable families. This church is fast becoming a community development center, providing education, vocational training, medical care, food and non-food aid in attempt to address the needs of the refugee families. It's just one of many churches that are helping refugees in this way. Diversity is important and critical in the Middle East. The loss of any minority support is a loss to the richness and the life of the region, and we should all do what we can to protect and support these minorities. The United States, the European nation, and the West in general have often preached the importance of upholding and preserving human rights, equality, and the rule of law. Yet these nations have been slow to support Christians to maintain these rights in Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon, and elsewhere in the Middle East. Of course, the Yazidis of the Middle East need help, need defense, but also do the Christians, as well as all other moderate and peace-loving communities. This conference, IDC, comes at a most critical and dangerous juncture in the Middle East history. And here I would like to salute all the efforts invested in this historic event. Finally, Christianity preaches a message of love and tolerance, which Christ taught us. In a region where violence and intolerance is rife, the Middle East needs Christians now more than it has at any other time. It is vital for Christians to remain in their lands, to promote and spread peace, hope, love, and reconciliation between followers of different faiths, and to remain salt and light, as well as faithful witness to Jesus Christ. The alternative is too terrible to imagine. So why is Christianity vital for the Middle East? Because history has clearly shown that Christians were and remain a most necessary component of peacemaking and peace building in the region, now and in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nabil. Our next speaker will be Bishop Julian Dobbs of the Barnabas Fund. Bishop Dobbs.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I bring you greetings from the Barnabas Fund and also the Anglican Church in North America, whom I represent. We read in the Acts of the Apostles, he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, having determined allotted periods and the boundaries of their dwelling place. Christianity is intrinsically linked to the Middle East. It is in the Middle East that Christianity was birthed in the backwaters of the then Roman Empire, and from where the message of the Christian gospel spread throughout the Roman Empire to Ethiopia and the Persian Empire. The missionary endeavors of the Church of the East brought Christianity even further, beyond Persia and Arabia, to Central Asia, India, and China. It was the Greek language which was initially the main vehicle, and then also the Syriac language, a dialect of Aramaic. The latter language allowed the development of strong literary traditions in Syrian Christianity, particularly poetry and liturgy that remains in use today, and also teaching on theology. Just last week, a series of unprecedented meetings and events were held in London, England, where Anglican Archbishop of Canterbury, the Most Reverend Justin Welby, hosted leaders and representatives of churches of the Middle East and the wider Christian church in Great Britain at Lambeth Palace. After discussing the plight of Christians and minorities in Iraq and Syria and the wider Middle East, the Archbishop read from an agreed statement expressing solidarity with and advocating for all those who continue to suffer gross violations of the fundamental right and freedom to practice their chosen faith. He said, "The Middle East is the birthplace of Christianity and home to indigenous Christian communities that have been an indispensable part of its history. Despite the challenges, Christians in the region were and are," declared the Archbishop, "a stabilizing and reconciling presence." I wholeheartedly agree and trust you do too. The Archbishop of Canterbury is to be commended in his advocacy for the right of religious freedom and the important place of Christianity in the Middle East. However, today, as in history, as we have heard, the existence of Christians in the Middle East, the birthplace of Christianity, is being threatened by the rise of a resurgent Islam. In the 7th century, the growth of Islam changed the political, social, and religious landscape of the region. Christians quickly lost swathes of territory to Muslims, and from the religion of the state, Christianity turned into the religion of minorities. Christians became subordinates or dhimmis under Islamic law. They had to pay the special tax, jizya, and they often faced forced conversion. Ironically, however, Christians of the Middle East are recognized, as our brother said, as indispensable conduits of culture, knowledge, literature, philosophy, and science to Muslims. It is, in fact, the Christians who enriched the Muslim civilization, amongst other things, with Greek philosophical texts that they dutifully translated into Arabic. While Christians under the Muslim rule had periods of relative security and protection, they also experienced intense persecution and brutality. The events of the late 19th and early 20th century made the Christians of the Middle East particularly vulnerable, and they became one of the most uprooted communities. The dramatic dispersion and relocation in the 19th and 20th century was due to the Damascus massacre of the 1860s, the Armenian genocide of 1915, and the expulsion of Pontian Greeks in 1922. Sadly, these were not merely incidental, isolated events, but they became a continuum, a systematic process of eliminating Christians from the Middle East. War crimes, massacres, persecution and harassment caused a continuous exodus of the Christian community and a drastic decline in numbers of a once dominant community. This has been a very sad development, as Christians have been making, as we've heard throughout this conference, valued and important contributions to the cohesion of society in the Middle East. As the patriarch of the Syrian Orthodox Church said earlier, the founder of the Ba'ath Party, Mikhail Aflaq, as well as George Habash and Anton Saadeh, all Christians amongst others who played an important role in Arab nationalism, a stabilizing force in the Middle East, promoting the ideas of Arab inclusiveness, national awakening, and a moderating impact on politics and society. Their transformative contribution also extended through education and business, and the Muslim neighbors historically appreciated this. Quoting Krista Bryant, many say it's important to maintain Christian communities in the Middle East. They see the quality of their schools, their contribution as entrepreneurs, merchants, and overwhelmingly middle or upper class consumers, and the religious plurality they inevitably bring as essential and enriching to Arab society. Of serious consideration is the important yet fading link between the ancient church of the Middle East and modern Christianity and Christianity worldwide. Their lonely fate is tragic, not only because their history has been lost or forgotten, as Philip Jenkins aptly describes in his book, The Lost History of Christianity. They have also been largely neglected as a community by the Western Church, despite their history, survival, and perseverance in the Middle East. As we know, Western governments rarely factor into their regional strategies the Christians of the Middle East, though they have been living in the region since the dawn of Christianity. As a struggling minority, Christians have also been facing the brunt of conflict and insurgency. It was the Christian community who was targeted over the ouster of Mohammed Morsi, the pro-Muslim Brotherhood president of Egypt, in 2013. Churches set on fire in Minya province, and Christians were systematically and violently attacked. Atrocities committed by ISIS in Iraq and Syria only plunged the region and its Christian minorities into a deeper crisis. All too often, the plight of Christians is now described as a looming genocide and extermination, irrevocable and brutal. A close parallel to the current dramatic demographic changes in the region is the exodus of the Sephardi and Mizrahi Jewish community from the Middle East in 1948 onwards. Jews have been living in the MENA region since antiquity, mostly as a tolerated or suppressed minority. And this left a mark that Mordechai Nissan describes as the dhimmi syndrome, and I quote, he writes, "For galut, exile or diaspora, is an inner psychological domain, feebleness and fear, a loss of dignity, more than just a lack of political power, all derivative from centuries of persecution and homelessness. It is shame of oneself in front of others." Nissan argues further that it is Zionism that was there to help deal with this syndrome and turn Jews from feeling inferior to feeling proud. Now, as we've experienced, while the state of Israel and Zionism are highly politicized, lessons can still be learned from the experience of the Jewish community in the Middle East. The self-image of the protected, persecuted minority, and the recent experience of expulsion, flight, and relocation of Christians in the Middle East has traumatic and long-standing consequences. The fact that the plight of fleeing Christians and other minorities receive mostly silent responses from Western governments only adds to their sense of abandonment and despair. Even the media would rather emphasize the recent assault on the Yazidi community over similarly brutal and systematic attacks on the Christian community. While the West is often proud to celebrate its richness and diversity, the Middle East is on a path to become homogeneous and uniform. Not only is this enforced unnatural uniformity in the ancient lands also known as the cradle of civilization, it's also a very costly one. The price is the exodus of its minorities and the eradication of their legacy, as is the case with the atrocities in Iraq and Syria. It is a break in the continuation and transmission of the tradition of Eastern Christianity, a branch of Christianity where tradition is critical. It is a ruthless and forceful disruption of the religious community, their infrastructure, churches and monasteries, liturgies, rites and celebrations, even language, Aramaic, all of which have existed for centuries, if not millennia. Once the heritage of Christians in the Middle East is obliterated, their status as dhimmis is reinforced. If Christians are eradicated from the region, so is the Eastern Christian civilization. This will be detrimental to the Middle East. The cost is considerably higher as it is not only about forced expulsion and violence against Christians, but about anyone who is other. There is no guarantee that with the exodus of Christians and other minorities, the followers of radical ideologies will not turn on others whom they deem inferior or not proper Muslims. If the West does not respond, the East is bound to descend into even greater chaos. I firmly believe that religious freedom and security in the Middle East are directly connected to the continuing strong, faithful, and growing presence of Christianity in the region. Speaking in New York on the 29th of December, 1949, Jacques Maritain, French Catholic philosopher and prominent drafter of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, wrote, "In times of scandalous triumphs of falsehood and violence, an heroical inspiration and belief are needed, which is found," he wrote, "in none other than Jesus of Nazareth." It is our responsibility to act and to raise our voices on behalf of Christians in the Middle East, their right to remain in their ancient biblical and historical communities, and to protect their valuable contribution to the church and global civilization. God bless you.
Thank you, Bishop Dobbs. Our next speaker is Michael Lasavita from CNEWA. Mr. Lasavita.
Thank you. Eminence, distinguished guests, I extend to you warm greetings from Monsignor John Kozar, President of the Catholic Near East Welfare Association, also known in the Middle East as Al-Baqta Babawiya, the Pontifical Mission. Sorry for my bad Arabic. In November, Monsignor Kozar and I were in the Lebanese village of Fatka. It's perched high atop a coastal mountain. Fatka is an ancient settlement, now smothered with opulent homes and luxury high-rises. But not all of its residents are wealthy. Jihad Latif is an amiable 43-year-old Maronite, husband and father of 4. About 15 years ago, he opened a workshop producing candles in the ruins of his grandfather's home. Under the span of Ottoman-era arches, workers produced liturgical candles, as well as candles for domestic purposes. Mr. Latif's workshop commands stunning views. Quote, "My family and I are fighting to stay in our village. I have had offers to sell my land, but my family wants to stay here. We could have left Fatka, but where would we go? Where would I raise my children?" Many of his neighbors, all Christian, have already sold their properties to real estate developers and investors, and they've moved to Australia, Brazil, or Canada. Here he said, "We're free to live our faith." Mr. Latif's work serves as a message and as a metaphor. He works to provide light. For millennia, this has been the call of Christians everywhere. But now, Storm clouds are brewing, threatening to extinguish that light from the very place that brought us the light of the world. Murderous extremists in their genocidal drive to rid the Middle East of its minorities have grabbed the headlines and the attention of politicians and even policy wonks. The horror of the last few months with execution and torture, fear and intimidation has sparked a new exodus of persecuted peoples, many of them Christians, some of them here. But war and violence are not the only threat to Christian survival in the Middle East. Economic realities have long contributed to the emptying of the region's Christian community. A low-interest microcredit loan from Catholic Near East Welfare Association has enabled Mr. Latif to expand his workshop, add additional workers, and increase his earnings. But our modest program cannot possibly stem the tide of Christian emigration from Lebanon or the rest of the Middle East. The tide threatens to become a flood, one that would change the character of the Middle East forever. Pope Francis has expressed again and again his sympathy and solidarity for the suffering in this part of the world. In the summer, he urged Christians in the Middle East to hold firm and, quote, never falter in conviction that the fire of Pentecost, the power of love, can half the fire of arms, hatred, and vengeance. And just like last week, he told the Christians of Iraq that, quote, these last of you, the defenseless and the persecuted, you are the heart of the church. The church suffers with you and is proud of you. You are her strength. We need to remember these people, our family, in our prayers. And we need to remember, too, that following Jesus is about persevering. It's about displaying heartfelt solidarity with those in need. We do not take this pilgrimage alone. And now, more than ever, we need to do all that we can to ensure the survival of Middle East Christians. The Middle East Christians have been on the move since the apostles left Jerusalem. Whether hiding from persecution by Jewish leaders, Roman emperors, Persian forces, Byzantine bishops, Ottoman bureaucrats, the region's Christians have demonstrated a great agility and a tremendous will to survive. In October 2010, Pope Benedict XVI hosted a special assembly of the Synod of Bishops to address the challenges facing the Christians of the Middle East. Emigration was discussed in depth long before Mubarak fell, civil war erupted in Syria, and a caliphate proclaimed in Mosul. In his apostolic exhortation, Ecclesia in Media Oriente, the Pope noted that many Christians are now seeking more favorable horizons and places of peace where their families will be able to live a dignified and secure life without fear. This is a heart-rending decision, he said. It has a profound impact on individuals, families, and churches. It dismembers nations and contributes to the human, cultural, and religious impoverishment of the Middle East. A Middle East without Christians, or even with a few, would no longer be the Middle East, end quote. Throughout the Arab world, historians, sociologists, politicians, and clergy agree. Quote, the fewer Christians there are, the more Islamic fundamentalism rises, fills the void, and gains the upper hand, said Mohammed Samak, political advisor to Lebanon's Grand Mufti. For Christians to disappear from the Middle East, he said, it would be like pulling out the threads of a cloth so that the whole social fabric risks unraveling and dying. Unlike Judaism or Islam, Christianity is not tied to a place, a land, or a shrine. Over time, as the Middle East Christians move from place to place, leaving their ancient centers of Antioch or Damascus, Edessa or Mosul, Nisibis or Baghdad, they maintain their identities, their cultures, their languages, their rites, and their unique approaches to the one Christian faith. You have defied death and prospered, founding new centers, new monasteries, new convents, new churches, and new schools. nor is mature Christianity bound by tribal mores or ethnic customs. Christianity transcends national and cultural boundaries, and while particular churches may have at times become entangled with a certain culture, ethnic group, or even political party, Middle East Christians serve the whole world as you now envelop that whole world. Perhaps the critical mass of a faith community that gave us the origins of Arab nationalism, modern Arab scholarship, pan-Arab sentiments, and Palestinian liberation theology will eventually evaporate. But hopefully the seeds of hope and social justice sowed by generations of Christian priests and counselors, doctors and nurses, sisters and midwives, therapists and teachers will germinate and take root. Hopefully these well-watered roots will sprout shoots, leading to the growth of what Pope Benedict called positive secularism and thriving Middle East societies, quote, concerned for the fundamental rights of the human person, whatever his or her origins, religious convictions, and political preferences. A healthy secularity, he said, frees religion from the encumbrance of politics and allows politics to be enriched by the contribution of religion while maintaining the necessary distance, clear distinction, and dispensable collaboration. All is not despair in the Middle East. Despite the deluge of violence, despite the flight, Middle East Christians continue to play a significant role. Through your emergency relief responses, social service initiatives, schools and hospitals, Christians even now are restoring self-respect and trust. You bring joy to persons robbed of these basic human values by the destructive ideologies plaguing your homelands. As Middle East Christians, you offer a message, and you also possess a powerful weapon, Jesus' message of forgiveness and reconciliation. Christians possess a unique culture, said the Latin Catholic Archbishop of Baghdad, Jean Sleiman, and that it displays the willingness to moderate. Your challenge is to bridge misunderstandings and differences. As bridge builders, we Christians have an important role to play, even if we are a tiny minority and perhaps do not value this role. Forgive me. It's important, the Archbishop continues, because we Christians have to be convinced that our role is important. Catholic Near East is an agency of the Holy See, founded in 1926, and we work throughout the Middle East. And through our long-standing partnerships with the local churches, we accompany you to affirm human dignity, alleviate poverty, encourage dialogue, and inspire hope. As children of the resurrection, Christians, we are at our best and inspire hope, which all of the peoples of the Middle East need in order to reclaim their inherent dignity. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Our next speaker is Neemat Frem. Mr. Frem is the Vice President of the Maronite Foundation and a board member of In Defense of Christians. Mr. Frem.
Thank you, Judge Boohaker. Hello. Well, Judge, I will go back to the courtroom as you started at the beginning, and I want to thank the witnesses that have really brought us a picture of the Middle East, and I will try to plead the case. Let's see how an engineer would plead in your courtroom. As a start, I consider that the presence of the Christians in the Middle East is to be considered one of the most fundamental human legacy. Hundreds of generations have entrusted us to protect and nurture. By us, we mean not only the Christians of the Middle East, even not all the inhabitants of the Middle East. It is every citizen of the world that believes that mankind heritage, as well as its future is his or her responsibility and vocation. The latest developments of outrageous scale that the Middle East has experienced is the ultimate call for action. An action that is beyond mere reaction. An action that is commensurate to the barbaric cruelty of a group of people with fundamentalism as a core set of belief and exclusion as a standard mode of operation. The response should be a rallying cry for those that believe that moderation is a fundamental value of all religions, and acceptance of diversity is a basic right and duty of all human societies. The response should be a real opportunity for those that believe that the set of values embodied in the ideology and barbaric actions of ISIS is rebuked, and the heretic behavior of those who believe in it is condemned by Islam as a religion and is officially rejected by all Islamic majority states. The coalition of regional and international forces to disrupt and destroy ISIS, announced yesterday by President Obama, is the appropriate platform to clearly express the condemnation of such ideology and actively confront it. Now, why Christianity is vital to the Middle East today? We believe that the vocation of the Christians in the Middle East, those that have stayed throughout all the different periods of the Islamic expansion, is to be the cornerstone of the moderation and inclusion values that are to prevail in the Holy Land of religions. In those precise lands that are the cradle of monotheistic religions, lands where God expressed his mysterious and holy presence in the most obvious ways to mankind. Moderation and inclusion, the building blocks of the wellness of all people, of all nations, shall prevail. The societies we are all proud of, built on the basics of human rights and democracy, will be challenged, and the fate of mankind, future generations, will be at stake if we do not overcome. Disrupting and destroying ISIS should not be the only objective of this coalition. A clear evolutionary process in the whole Islamic world should be the real outcome. The true values of tolerance and moderation of Islam should become the only allowed expression of behavior across all Islamic regional religion schools. The Christians of the Middle East, after regaining their homes, rights, and vigor, will be, along with all the citizens of the Middle East, the true guardians of these values. Alas, once again, the crucifixions and ultimate sacrifice of the followers of Jesus shall be the furrow in which the seeds of goodness and love shall grow and blossom. This is really my plea for the Christians to stay in the Middle East. And on this day of 9/11, I cannot but remember those that died today, and at the same time, those that committed this big act, this awful act. For me, they announced a new century. A century that started with people killing themselves and killing others in the name of God. One would look and say, what a difference. 20th century started with people saying God is dead, like Nietzsche and Bergson before. 100 years later, one would think that this is the revenge of God. Is that true? Is God coming back in this form? We say no. Believers and Christians say no. It is only void that is filled with this form of spirituality and beliefs. It is a belief in Jesus Christ, the Christ of the Gospel, the Christ of the Quran, that is written in the Quran as much as the Gospel, that creates the harmony between brothers all around the world. And only with this spirit that this century will be saved and the millennium will be built on the values, on those values of inclusion and acceptance. This is where our testimony is so much important in the Middle East as much as the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Neemat. Our final speaker is Bishop Mar Awa Royel from the Diocese of California. Bishop is the Secretary General of the Assyrian Church of the East. Sayyidina.
Asking an Eastern bishop to keep it short is very difficult. And asking an Eastern bishop to keep it short when there are no patriarchs present is a miracle in and of itself. Shim'awa wawra ruchat qutshal almin. Your Eminence, Your Excellencies and Graces, Reverend Fathers, dear friends, sisters and brothers. It is a great honor and a privilege to be here with you this afternoon representing my Patriarch, His Holiness Mardencha IV, the Catholicos Patriarch of the Assyrian Church of the East, along with my brother Bishop Mar Polis Benjamin. And His Holiness, of course, sends his greetings and his many thanks for the organizers. Unfortunately, he could not attend because of health reasons. The Church of the East, which Bishop Dobbs briefly touched upon, is the church that brought the gospel to China in the middle of the 7th century, exactly in the year 635. The Assyrian Church of the East is the first ecclesiastical organization of Christianity in India in the late 3rd and early 4th century. And the Assyrians, of course, along with the Syriacs and the Chaldeans, are the indigenous people of Iraq, about which we have heard these many days. This afternoon's panel discussion is the most pertinent one, I believe, because it gives a sense of direction and purpose to our discussions and deliberations in which we have engaged during the course of this summit. It is a topic that affects the daily lives of our churches and our peoples, both in the Middle East and in the diaspora, namely, what indispensable role does Christianity have to play in the Middle East? That Christianity does have an important role to play in the Middle East today cannot be questioned. The changing demographics of our churches and our peoples in our homeland in the East goes hand in hand with defining the vitality of the role of our Christian faith in the Middle East today. Notwithstanding the fact that many of our churches have migrated to the West, and as a cause we have seen the dwindling of the numbers of our faithful in the Middle East, the roots of Christianity has its important role to play in society, and this can never be undone. I would like to echo the words of His Holiness Pope Francis, who stated in Jordan during his visit to the Holy Land this past May, and I quote, "We will not be resigned to think about the Middle East without Christians." I propose to look at the important and vital role of Christianity in the Middle East in its three important moments or junctures, namely its past, its present, and its future. First, historically, Christianity has played a role in the Middle East from its very inception and from the beginnings of the early church. And this marked an important change in the life of humanity as a whole. The very mystery of the Incarnation itself, unique to our Christian faith, has marked a turning point for all of Christianity on a cosmic level. God stepped into history in order to show His solidarity with man. God became man that man might become God. Therefore, by its very nature, Christianity has the vital role of being a salutary faith. That is, it offers salvation to humanity by demonstrating the proximity of our Creator to His most cherished of creations, man. In the Incarnation, the Son of God, the Word become flesh, announced to us the gospel of salvation and eternal life in the name of Jesus. Christianity, therefore, is not just another religion in the Middle East, even though the classical nomenclature of comparative religion gives it the title of being one of the, quote, monotheistic religions, but it offers salvation to the world and to the peoples of the Middle East, especially those who perpetrate atrocities. As Christians, we can never lose sight of the importance of the missionary aspect of the church. By its very nature, the church must evangelize and bring the gospel to all peoples, even to those who demonstrate themselves to be enemies of the gospel. And this is evident in the great commissioning of the 12 by our Lord in Matthew 28. As the church grew and became present in the whole East, it brought civilization and learning to all the peoples of the Middle East. The histories of the court physician of the Abbasid Caliphate, for example, is all too well known in the annals of church history. The fact that Greek learning and philosophy passed into the Latin West and to the very Arabs themselves via the Syriac translators and fathers is living proof of the pivotal role of the Christian East in the society and social context of their day for countless generations. The second important moment of Christianity's vitality for the Middle East is the present, is our age. Indeed, this is a pertinent moment for all of us gathered here today under the aegis of the IDC, and it is a matter of concern for all of the churches that continue to struggle for survival in the Middle East. It cannot be denied that the role of the Christians of the East in helping to build up the new Arab nation state that were constructed and brought to existence after the First World War, and as a result of the dismantling of the Ottoman Empire, was a most decisive one. Christians excelled in the areas of science, mathematics, culture, education, medicine, and literature, not to exclude their influence and important role in the political life of the countries of the Middle East, which they have known as their homes since time immemorial. The many private schools owned and operated by the Christians since the formation of the modern Arab states are a living testimony to these contributions on the part of Christian society. Respecting the culture and religious sensitivities of the Muslims, of the Arabs, all the while, Christian educators tutored and imparted learning and culture to the most elite of the Arab fabric of society. Further, till this very day, Christian caretakers and those who engage in healthcare have cared for children, women, and the elderly of Muslim Arab society without distinction and in a most superb and caring manner. We can only imagine what a vast void would be left in modern-day Muslim Arab society were there to be no Christian schools, hospitals, child and elderly care facilities operating in the Middle East. What this means is that Christians and Christianity as a whole are indispensable in the fabric of Muslim and Arab society today. They have always been since the rise of Islam in the early 7th century. The third and final moment of the vitality of Christianity in the Middle East is what we look forward today, and that is the future. What will Christianity face in 5, 10, and 20 years from now in front of an Islam that is growing ever more intolerant and fundamentalistic? The history of the church in the East teaches us many lessons, and we can see well-established patterns and tendencies that more or less repeat themselves any given number of years. However, can the world stand by and continue to allow that to happen today in the 21st century? What will become of a Christianity which is ever so persecuted, but continues, notwithstanding that persecution, to contribute to the good of the society in which it lives, even though that society is unwelcoming and antagonistic? How will our churches survive in the East in these coming years? What can we do to ensure that survival, or at least, if nothing else, slow it down quite considerably? I'm of the opinion that this third moment of Christian vitality in the Middle East will be determined by one possible factor among many others, and that is the unity of the Christian churches together. It is no understatement that our present cross and burden being borne by all of our churches has indeed brought us here together. The present summit, the IDC, and many other organizations across this country and across the globe demonstrate the willingness of the Christian churches in the East, in partnership with the church in the West, to come together and to unite, as it were, in order to understand our common plight and search out common solutions and answers to our present-day problems. There is already a certain level of unity that is demonstrated and enjoyed by our churches. And on the first day of the summit, many of the eminent speakers expounded upon the topic of the call to unity. I remember that Patriarch Aram I reminded all of us that unity is an essential part of the church's very nature and its fabric. And that is exactly the point that I would like to propose as the third moment of Christianity in the Middle East, and that is the future of our churches in the lands we know and call our own, yet which in a very real way are not welcoming, and yet are not our own. The ecumenical movement in the life of our churches is a real and proper response to addressing the concerns and fears of the survival of Christianity in the Middle East for the future, and this truly cannot be overstated. Although we are united in a very real sense here today as brothers and sisters who adore and who confess the one Christ, but yet we acknowledge that we are not truly and really and concretely united. The scandal of the division of the body of Christ, that is of his church, the renting of the seamless garment of Christ, is a wound that we all suffer from in our daily lives and in the lives of our churches and faithful today. Crystallized dogmatic expressions and anathemas continue to be a part of our ecclesial, canonical, and liturgical identity in a very real and definitive sense. And the greatest scandal is that we cannot, as of yet, fully and really participate at the Lord's altar together in order to partake of the one bread of life and the one cup of salvation. As we move forward in the lives of our churches, in the face of neighbors who have not acted so neighborly towards us in centuries past and today, let us remember, in a certain sense, our own sins and make the firm resolve to proclaim the one gospel of Christ together, to proclaim one Christ, and to proclaim one faith. We have been united these days together as brothers and sisters in Christ on the account of evil which is perpetrated against our own brothers and sisters in the Middle East. Let us take this momentum and move together and be united really and visibly into the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, which is built by Jesus Christ himself, so that the gates of Hades might never prevail against her. Thank you very much.
We finished early. I have 15 minutes left in our time slot. If anyone has any questions for the panel, they have all said they'll be glad to answer any questions that you have. I'm looking. All right. Yeah, okay.
Question to Mar Awa. You just came from northern Iraq 2 days ago. Could you hear what's going on there? What you've seen? Yes.
Thank you very much for the
Sure. Go ahead.
Thank you for the question. I was part of a delegation of bishops sent by our patriarch, His Holiness Mar Dinka, over a week ago. And we had visited the major areas where the displaced Christians of the plains of Nineveh and from the city of Mosul also had taken refuge, namely in Arbil, in Duhok, and in Ankawa. And what many of you, I'm sure, have heard in regards to the condition and the plight of these displaced Christians is something that cannot be overstated. Their needs are both moral and humanitarian. In terms of the humanitarian need, that's obvious, that food, shelter, clothing, the living conditions of which we saw children and women who were, and families who were being housed in a structure that had not even been completed. It was just made of concrete that is to be constructed by the Chaldean bishop in Ankawa. And we had seen children who were placed on the barren concrete floor. And it's a gross sight, really. It's very touching, and it's difficult on the heart, especially on one who serves in the church, because we see the faithful of Christ, the flock of Christ, suffering so much. And I'd like to thank many organizations that have helped out there. We have the Assyro program, the Assyrian Church of the East Relief Organization. Caritas has helped, and many other national organizations have aided. In terms of the moral needs that they need our support. And there were those who said, please, Your Grace and bishops, and help us to leave. Try and get us a visa. And we tried to explain to them that we're clergy, we don't work for any governmental agencies, and that will be difficult. But there were many others who did in fact mention and state emphatically that they want to stay. They do not want to leave their homes. They want to go back to their homes and their villages because that is their homeland. And they realize in a simple, non-dogmatic, non-theological way that their presence there really indicates the presence of Christ and Christianity in that country and in those lands. So they definitely need our prayers and our financial and moral support. And it was very touching. And I know there were many other groups that have come in. The day that we were leaving last week, there was a group of Lutheran bishops who came from Germany, from Bavaria, to visit the campsites and whatnot. So I hope that helps. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Sadna. All right, thank you. Anyone else? Yes.
Christian lobby. We don't have a Christian lobby. We have many communities. We have Maronite communities, we have Orthodox communities, we have many communities, but we don't have a real Christian lobby who can serve our goal. And instead to serve all for one and one for all, we should serve all for one goal, and one goal will serve all the Christians around the world. Why don't you start, based on your personal experiences, to work to establish a Christian lobby? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Boutros. First of all, I'm sure we're talking about a Christian Middle Eastern lobby, because there are lobbies in this country and who are with Christian background. I guess IDC can become one day, and I know that the brain behind INDC, Mr. Shagouri and friends, would sure welcome ideas of that nature. And basically what IDC is usually a lobby. You don't start a lobby like you start a factory or a supermarket or something. I believe that it comes after initiatives of that nature that grow naturally into becoming a lobby. But at the heart of it, probably, in the inception phase, the ideas should be clear. And this is basically what is a pre-work to have a clear ideas. And as you said, before the clear ideas, there should be the one heart and one unity. And this is throughout, I would say, the last hundreds of years, our part of the world, and mostly the Christians in our part of the world, were not particularly good at that. And this is why we always failed in having this unity. I believe that in those times, very hard times like today, this is where the church and the true believers basically flourish. Persecution have always been the time where renewal and rebirth was in our history. I think that out of the sufferings of our brothers and sisters in Iraq, in Syria, and all our part of the world, I think out of those, I believe personally that this might be the labor of a fantastic child coming, which is going to be so important for all the world and not only for the Middle East, which is a common vision for unity among Christians and then among all religions, based not on an attempt of putting God away and replacing it by a materialistic world, but by very deep values, where I think our heritage as Christians, as followers of Jesus Christ, will be so important and will be traveling through time from generation to generation to continue an evolutionary process of all mankind. But this is really where we are today. And this is how I personally, and a lot of us here, see the sufferings of our brothers and sisters today in Iraq and the Middle East. Thank you.
Thank you. Any others? Yes, yes. How about right here? Okay.
Just one more question. How are we expecting help and support from the U.S. while, in fact, the Obama administration created all this mess in Syria and Iraq?
Okay.
We have to ask for the divine providence. That's conditional. He said that how can we expect help to come to Syria and Iraq when the current administration has caused a lot of the problems. One of the principles of the Catholic Church is something called subsidiarity, is to provide help at its closest, most lowest level. And even though we have many problems, we also have many people willing to solve the problems. And the people that are on the ground that the bishop went to meet, and the bishops and the local clergy that haven't abandoned their posts and haven't left and gone for greener pastures, remain there. And when we spoke with Bishop Warda, he said that four things: to pray, to support organizations that help. He named Aid to the Church in Need as one, and to build awareness and to not forget them. So if we want to help, we don't have to look at the government for an answer all the time. We can look to local NGOs and people to help on the humanitarian level. And because the Catholic Church and the Christian community works in a very slow, from the roots way, the changes will occur, but it will take time. Unfortunately, we live in human bodies last 70, 80, 90 years. We think in very short time. We have to remember that God is looking at this differently. And I agree with my brother in saying that there will be new birth. There will be something coming of this, because when I suffer, I feel bad. But when these people suffer, they're going through excruciating suffering. I mean, beyond anything that I can understand. And it sounds crazy, but that suffering is going to serve a purpose. And I think there will be rebirth, and there will be opportunity. And we can't always look to government for the solution, only when necessary. We should advocate for sure. We should definitely tell the congressmen, tell the senators, tell everyone that will listen that Christians are suffering and they need our help. And keep telling them, keep knocking on their doors, keep ringing their bells, and don't leave them alone. Our Lord said to the woman who kept begging for help, I come for the Jews. And she said, but even the dog eats scraps from the master's table. And he said to her, your faith. It was your faith and your tenacity that gave you your answer to your prayers. And that's what we have to do. We have to pray, support them through NGOs, and we have to continue to build awareness, and we have to remember that the politicians work for us. Don't let them off the hook. Keep pushing them.
Thank you for a fantastic answer, but I will add also that I believe that every opportunity is a responsibility. And what we have seen, what we have heard the last 2 days of the initiative of the administration here in the US, for me is a great opportunity, because announcing this coalition is an ideal time for those that believes, especially in our part of the world, in the Middle East, countries, regional powers, that believes that the true Islam is not what we are seeing today, have a platform to speak out very loudly. I expect, and a lot of us here expect, to see action, not words, in the coming weeks. If they miss this opportunity, I believe that we will really have missed a great inflection point in history. And I look forward for it. And this is where I see a major initiative happening now. And we have to pray all for it, so that we all stand up and say, what we are seeing today is not Islam. This is a bunch of few people that have nothing to do with the majority of the Middle East. It's not a minority, it's not a protection of minorities against majorities. We are talking of fighting or stopping a bunch of heretics that have a vision of that we are against. All of us, all mankind is against. This is, I think, where we are today.
We have time for just one more. Okay. All right, well, I'm told that we can't have time for any more questions. I'm getting a sign that says wrap up. Well, I had Dr. Ayub had his hand up, and I think this is going to be the last one. They're telling me that's it.
This question is for you.
Oh, for me, okay.
What we witnessed during the last 3 days, the birth of a Christian lobby
Well, the number one thing I think when we go back is, I know we've all come from one church to the other. We have to reinforce the identity of our people to their heritage and to their religion, because this forms the base for doing any kind of work here in the United States. That's the first thing we have to do. The next is we need to talk to our local people, our local politicians, our senators, our congressmen, and give them the message that it was put in the Guardian newspaper earlier this year in January. It was written about a gentleman who wrote a letter of greetings to Tawfiq Baglini, who just sat down next to you, Dr. Ayoub, former Prime Minister Tony Blair. Tony Blair says in his article in The Guardian in January of 2014 that he believes the great wars of this century, the 21st century, will be based and rationalized on religion. And they'll probably start in the Middle East. And the best and the only way to solve that is to do what these gentlemen have done, either through their churches, through their NGOs, the sister here for what she has done, to be out in the region. The Christians are, as we have heard all during this conference, they are the mediating force. They take the sharp edges off of people. Some sects of Islam cannot get along with other sects of Islam, but everyone gets along with the Christians. If there's anyone who can teach peace, reconciliation, tolerance to these people who so desperately want to kill each other, it's the Christians. You know, Shakespeare wrote, if you want to do something wrong, first let's kill the lawyers. Shakespeare. It seems that in the Middle East, if they want to have a war, the first thing is, first let's kill all the Christians, then we can have a war. So if the world, and it's not just the Middle East, if the world wants peace, if they didn't have Christians in the Middle East, they need to import them over there. Thank God we still have them there. The best thing we do is keep them there. Thank you all very much.